Ever get that feeling, when you're trying to understand how big companies handle their IT security and reliability? It's like this huge puzzle, right?
Oh, definitely. So many moving parts, so many standards. It can feel pretty daunting.
Exactly. But today we're going to sort of guide you through a really key piece. It's the IT audit framework, or ITF from ISACA.
Right, ITAF. Think of it as the essential guidebook for the pros,
hmm
making sure a company's IT stuff, processes, apps, systems, all of it is working like it should.
And what's interesting, I think, is that even if you're not an IT auditor yourself, getting a handle on these ideas helps you understand what a good IT audit actually looks like and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And this framework, ITF, it's been seriously refined. The latest version, the fourth edition, kicked in back in October 2020.
And it wasn't just thrown together, was it?
No, not at all. It had input from, I think, over 65 reviewers, which really shows how much effort ISACA puts into keeping it relevant, especially with tech changing so fast.
That dedication is pretty clear. And like you said, it's not just insider baseball for auditors. Grasping this stuff is valuable for anyone who relies on those audit reports.
Totally.
Okay, so let's get down to specifics for this deep dive. We're really zeroing in on one fundamental part of ITF.
Which part are we tackling today?
We're looking at Performance Standard 1201, Risk Assessment and Planning, and its partner, the Performance Guidelines 2201, which covers the same topic.
Risk assessment and planning.
Yeah.
Foundational stuff.
Exactly. So think of us as your instructors today. We'll walk you through it, try to make it clear, demystify some of the jargon.
Sounds good. It's all about understanding how auditors actually plan their work by looking at risks first. That's the bedrock, like you said.
So Standard 1201, what's the core idea there?
Well, the core requirement, 1201.1, it basically says the IT audit function must use a solid risk assessment approach.
Okay, must use, not optional.
Definitely not optional. And that approach needs to be data-driven, considering both numbers, quantitative stuff, and qualitative factors, plus a clear methodology behind it.
And the goal of using this approach?
The main goal is to develop the overall IT audit plan, but also, crucially, to figure out how to best use the audit team's resources. Where should they spend their time?
Right, effective allocation. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about that big overall plan, is it? There's another part, 1201.2.
That's right. 1201.2 brings it down to the individual audit level. It says practitioners must identify and assess risks relevant to the specific area they're reviewing when they're planning that specific audit.
Okay. So risk assessment happens at both levels, high-level plan and specific engagement planning.
Precisely. It's not a one-and-done thing. It's integral to every single audit plan.
Got it. So that's the standard. Now, what about the guidelines 2201? How do they flesh this out?
Okay, so Guideline 2201 gives us the practical how-to. If you look at risk assessment for the overall IT audit plan first, Section 2201.2.1 really emphasizes comprehensiveness.
Meaning
The assessment has to cover the whole IT audit universe, everything the organization uses, basically. And you have to consider how critical each system, each application, each process is.
wow, okay. So the scope is potentially huge.
It can be, yeah. It gives you a sense of just how broad auditors need to think.
And Guideline 2201.2.2 gets more specific about what to analyze.
It does. It points to key things like risk to system availability.
Yeah.
Will systems be online when needed?
Can't do business without them.
Exactly. The data integrity, is the information accurate? Can you trust it?
Also critical.
And of course, business information confidentiality. Is sensitive data kept safe from prying eyes?
These all sound like pretty fundamental business concerns.
They absolutely are. And that same guideline, 2201.2.2, also talks about needing full coverage of the IT universe, but always focusing based on criticality.
So it's not just checking boxes everywhere, it's about focusing efforts where the risk and impact are highest.
Precisely. It's strategic. And it also mentions other factors to weigh up, like how good is management's own risk assessment? What are their risk supervision processes like? Are there risks in related areas that could spill over?
So it's quite interconnected. You look beyond just the immediate system.
You have to, yeah. It's a holistic view.
So this assessment, it's not just paperwork, right? Guideline 2201.2.3 says it actually shapes things.
Absolutely shapes things. It drives the prioritization and the scheduling of audits. It helps decide which areas get audited and how those specific audits are designed. It's the engine behind the plan.
And it's not done in isolation, is it? There's oversight.
Right. Guideline 2201.2.4 stresses that. You need approval for the approach from those charged with governance, the board, the audit committee,
Top level.
and then you need to communicate it to stakeholders. Transparency is key.
And I imagine this helps justify the resources needed.
That's exactly what Guideline 231.2.5 covers. By clearly showing where the risks lie, the audit function can make a strong case for the budget and staffing they need.
Matching resources to risk. Logical.
Then 2201.2.6 details what goes into the actual audit schedule based on this risk assessment. Things like considering non-IT audit needs, updating it annually.
Totally, okay.
Yeah, getting that governance approval again and making sure it lines up with the overall audit charter. It's all quite integrated.
And the ultimate goal, just to reiterate from 2201.2.7.
Simple, really. Find the areas needing the most audit attention to reduce the risk of getting the conclusions wrong, making sure you don't miss something big.
Makes sense. Now, how do auditors actually do this risk assessment? What methodologies are used?
Good question. Guideline 2201.3.3 mentions there's a range. It can be fairly simple, like judgment-based high, medium, low risk.
Just based on experience and knowledge?
Sort of, yeah. Or it could be much more quantitative, using numerical ratings, complex calculations. Often it's actually a mix of both.
So tailored to the situation?
Exactly. The key thing is the complexity should fit the organization being audited. A massive global bank needs something different than a small local business, right?
Of course.
And the guideline also points to other ISACA resources like the Risk IT framework and practitioner guide for folks who want to go deeper.
Useful pointers. And what about choosing which methodology to use? Guideline 2201.3.5 gives some hints there.
It does. Practical stuff, like what kind of information do you actually need? Financial impact isn't always the best measure for IT risk, for example.
Right. Availability might be more critical than a dollar figure sometimes.
Exactly. Also, cost of software tools, what data you already have versus the effort to get more, even what other users think of a methodology. Very practical considerations.
Okay, so that's the overall plan. What about when you're planning just one specific audit engagement? How does risk assessment work there?
Right. Shifting gears, Guideline 2201.4.1 is key here. For a specific audit, you identify and assess the risks relevant just to that area. And those results directly shape the audit objectives for that engagement.
Much more focused.
Much more focused. And the factors considered here, also in 2201.4.1, include things like what did previous audits find?
Learn from history.
Yep. Did they fix the problems identified before? What's the company's overall enterprise risk process like? How likely is this specific risk? And what's the potential impact, financial or otherwise?
So you're looking at past performance and future potential harm.
Pretty much. This leads us nicely into the concept of audit risk, mentioned in 2201.5.2.
Audit risk. Okay, what's that composed of?
It's broken down into two main buckets. First is subject matter risk, which itself includes inherent risk and control risk. The second main bucket is detection risk.
Inherent, control, and detection risk.
Got it. Auditors look at each of these to figure out the overall risk for that specific audit they're planning.
Okay, let's unpack those a bit. What's inherent risk? Guidelines 2201.6.1 and 2.
Inherent risk is basically the raw risk. How susceptible is the area to a major problem if you assume there are no controls at all?
Okay. Like a system with no security patches applied? High inherent risk.
Perfect example. Versus maybe a standalone PC, not networked, not holding sensitive data, probably very low inherent risk. And because IT audits often look at really critical business systems,
The inherent risk is usually pretty high.
it often is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's generally assessed as significant in those core areas.
Okay, so that's inherent risk. What about control risk? Guidelines 2201.7.1 and 2.
Control risk is the risk that a significant error happens and the company's own internal controls don't prevent it or they don't detect and fix it quickly enough.
So the controls fail, essentially.
Right. The example they give is like manually reviewing huge system logs, maybe high control risk because it's easy to miss something. Compare that to automated data validation checks, which might have lower control risk.
Makes sense. Automation helps consistency.
Definitely. And the guideline states that unless you can identify relevant controls, test them, and prove they work, you generally have to assume control risk is high.
Default to high unless proven otherwise.
Pretty much.
And then there's a distinction between pervasive and detailed controls in 7.3 and 7.4.
Yeah, quickly. Pervasive controls are the general overarching ones affecting all of IT, like overall security policies, change management. Detailed controls are more specific. Application controls, database controls.
And how do they relate?
Well, the key point is, if your pervasive general controls are weak, it makes it much more likely that your specific detailed controls won't work properly either.
Like a weak foundation for a house.
Exactly that analogy. If the foundation's bad, the specific rooms won't be sound.
Got it. Okay, final component.
Yeah.
Detection risk. Guidelines 2CO1.8.1 and 2.
Detection risk is the risk that the auditor's procedures won't find a material error that actually exists.
So the auditor misses something important.
Right. The example is like maybe a security breach happened, but the audit logs the auditor reviewed didn't capture the right info, so they miss it. That could be high detection risk.
Okay.
Conversely, if there's absolutely no disaster recovery plan, detection risk is low because it's usually pretty obvious to the auditor that it's missing.
Easy to spot.
Yeah. And importantly, the amount of testing the auditor does, the substantive testing, depends on their assessment of inherent and control risk.
How so?
If inherent and control risks are high, the auditor generally needs to gather more evidence, do more testing to reduce their own detection risk to an acceptable level.
Okay, so higher inherent control risk means more audit work needed.
Usually, yes. More evidence is required.
And there are a couple more points. Materiality threshold in 201.4.3 and 0.4.5.
Right. Basically, if the auditor sets a lower bar for what's considered material or significant.
Meaning smaller errors matter more.
Exactly. Then they need more precise audit results, which increases the overall audit risk. So they might need to broaden the scope or do more testing.
Okay. And illegal acts. Guideline 231.4.4 mentions that too.
Yeah, just a point that during planning, auditors need to consider the potential for illegal acts. If that seems like a risk, it might change the audit procedures and what they document.
Right, adds another layer to consider.
And just briefly, Guideline 220.9.1 on ongoing activities really just loops back and reinforces the main points. Develop the risk-based plan, update it annually, align with governance in the charter.
So it keeps the cycle going.
Keeps the cycle going, yes.
You know, it's interesting connecting these ITF specifics back to broader frameworks. You mentioned COBIT 2019 earlier. How does this risk assessment standard fit in?
Yeah, it aligns quite well. Standard 1201 and its guidelines, they directly support several COBIT governance and management objectives, like EDM 01, which is about setting up the governance framework itself.
Okay.
Also APO 12, which is explicitly about managed risk, and then MEA 03, managing compliance, and MEA 04, managed assurance.
So this risk assessment piece isn't just an isolated audit thing. It plugs right into the bigger picture of IT governance and management.
Absolutely. Seeing those connections really highlights how fundamental risk assessment is to the whole system of IT control and assurance.
That's a great point. So if we were to wrap things up, what's the main thing people should take away about risk assessment in IT audit planning?
I think the key takeaway is just how central it is. It's not just a box-ticking exercise before the real audit starts. It is the foundation.
The bedrock, as we said earlier.
Exactly. It's what makes the audit effective and efficient. And it happens at multiple levels, the big picture plan and the detailed individual audit.
And for you, listening in, understanding this gives you, what, a better view of how auditors work?
I think so, yeah. It gives you insight into their priorities. Why are they looking here and not there? It's usually driven by this risk assessment. It helps you appreciate the strategic thinking behind ensuring critical IT areas are covered.
Right. It's not random. There's a logic, a methodology based on risk.
Precisely.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, knowing how carefully IT auditors approach risk. Maybe think about your own world.
How so?
Well, is there an area in your work, or maybe even your personal life, where taking a more structured look at potential risks, identifying them, assessing them, could actually lead to, better decisions or outcomes?
That's a really interesting question, applying these principles more broadly.
Yeah. Maybe it's a project, a big decision, a personal goal. Could a mini risk assessment help?
Food for thought, definitely.
And of course, if you want to dive deeper into the official stuff, ISACA's website has tons of resources on ITAF and risk management.
Well worth exploring if this has piqued your interest.
Absolutely. Understanding these principles really can be empowering.